Elon Musk was born in South Africa. At 12 years old, he sold his first piece of commercial software he programmed. Years later, he went on to make his fortune during the internet boom, making just under $200 million with PayPal and just over $20 million with Zip2. Now, 39 years later, Elon is building rocket ships and making electric cars. As the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla Motors, Elon's dream is to make living on Mars a reality, maybe an affordable reality, during his lifetime. Here's my interview with Elon Musk, one of the most celebrated entrepreneurs today. So clearly you have many aspirations and an overwhelming drive to innovate. Take us back to when you were young. What were you like? What did you do? And how was motivation and drive sort of manifested and cultivated?
So I definitely was very driven as a kid and very willful. One of the things that I remember most from my childhood is I was, I think, 6 or something, maybe around that age. I was just learning to read, basically, and I was grounded one afternoon and prevented from going to play with my cousins who lived on the other side of town. And I disagreed with this, so I escaped from my nanny and walked across town.
At 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I could barely read the road signs. So, I mean, irrespective, this was obviously a very foolish thing to do because something terrible could have happened to me. I could have been kidnapped or run over or something like that.
Right.
But I was so determined to go play with my cousins that I basically walked clear across the city, the capital city.
At 6 years old?
Yeah.
And then you made it there, so you're successful, so you figured I can do anything I want.
I wouldn't say it's quite like that.
Until you got grounded.
My mom got really freaked out because she saw me, just as I was getting to my cousin's house, she saw me walking along the sidewalk and flipped out because she didn't know how I got there. And then I saw her and I ran and climbed up a tree and I wouldn't come down until they promised they wouldn't punish me and that I could play with my cousins.
And so they never punished you?
I didn't get punished, actually, but they didn't let me play with my cousins either.
Well, that's good. So your parents were influential in some ways. They took care of you, even though they let you, find your way across town by yourself. But how did they influence you? Did they make you read? Did they encourage, education? Did they make you go to science camp? Did they make you build things?
I was always sort of really interested in reading when I was a kid, and I would read everything that I could get my hands on. I read the encyclopedia. I read every.
At what age?
Let's see, probably age 9 or 10.
Okay. You were starting to read it?
Well, and not that I actually wanted to read the encyclopedia, but I ran out of things to read, so in desperation I read the encyclopedia.
You just really wanted to learn. So at an early stage you had that, and you had that inner drive yourself.
Yeah. So. Well, I just sort of, I got bored easily, and so unless I was doing something like reading or playing a video game or watching TV, and we had like terrible TV in South Africa. It was really bad TV. So there was only at best, I liked watching TV, but there wasn't that much of it. So.
But boredom leads to great things.
Boredom, so boredom led to a lot of reading.
So now, fast forward, Tesla started in 2003?
Yeah.
Started in 2003.
Wow, that is a big fast forward, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about your 20s and 30s. We won't do that.
Okay. So going to Tesla.
Yeah. So talk about the concept, the idea. What inspired you?
Sure.
Who was around you to help make this an idea, a reality?
Yeah. Actually, if I can go back a little bit to that, a little bit further and say the origins of why electric vehicles. Well, when I was in college, I thought about what are the things that are most going to affect the future of humanity, and the 3 things I came up with were the internet, transitioning to a sustainable energy economy, and that means both production and consumption of energy in a sustainable way, and the third was space exploration. So my interest in electric cars goes back 20 years to when I was in college, and In fact, the original reason I came out to Silicon Valley was to go to Stanford to work on a PhD in applied physics and material science to develop advanced energy storage technologies for electric vehicles.
Okay.
So this is a really long-standing interest of mine.
Right.
Goes back to way before 2003. But the thing that kind of spurred things in 2003 was a lunch that I had with Harold Rosen and J.B. Straubel, and that I got this sort of call out of the blue from Harold Rosen. He's a famous guy in space and electric cars.
Oh.
So he had something called Rosen Motors, but he also worked for Hughes Aerospace,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of how the connection kind of bridged over. And at the lunch, we're just talking about a bunch of things in general, and I mentioned that I had originally come out to California to work on electric vehicle technologies, and then
Right.
Harold mentioned, told me a bit about his past with Rosen Motors, and then JB mentioned that hey, there's this company called AC Propulsion that has this kind of very rough prototype electric sports car running on lithium-ion batteries, and it's getting really good performance. So I said that sounds interesting, and I thought with the advent of lithium-ion that really is a sort of a key enabler for electric cars.
Right.
So JB arranged for a test drive of the AC Propulsion T0 in 2003.
How many miles did it go back then?
Well, actually, the performance specs of the T0 are very, very similar to the Roadster.
Oh.
But it's a much more primitive car. It's basically like a kit car.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of just a fiberglass.
Like a golf cart or something.
There's a little bit of a golf cart, but it's
Yeah.
not something you could ever sell to people.
Okay.
Like it didn't have a roof.
Okay.
It didn't have any safety systems.
Mm-hmm.
It was very expensive and hand built.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to convince the AC Propulsion guys to commercialize the T0 and said, hey, I'm willing to fund you if you want to commercialize the T0, but it just wasn't of interest to them.
Right. Okay.
They were a very sort of small outfit. They liked to sort of tinker and experiment, but they weren't really interested, at least at the time, in creating a production sports car, electric sports car. But I kept pushing them on this, and eventually I said, look, if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And they said, well, if you're going to do it, there's some other people we should introduce you to. Maybe you guys should team up and go and do it. And that's how I met Martin Everhard, Mark Topping, and Ian Wright. And then JB also joined. I was actually able to convince JB to join Tesla. And so that's sort of like the founding team of Tesla was the five of us.
So when you started thinking about this idea and building it out, and there's different entry strategies, right, to get into the electric car industry, and your goal is to make mass market cars. That you created a very expensive, not mass market car, $100,000 Roadster, high expensive, low volume. Why that entry strategy?
It's actually, I think it's the only entry strategy that I thought had any chance of success. And the reason for that is, as a small startup, we don't have the economies of scale of the big car companies. Mm-hmm. Plus, we're really working with the first generation of technology. And there are two things that are really important in making technology available to the mass market and making it affordable. And those two things are economies of scale and being able to optimize the design. And it usually by the third version of something, that's when it kind of starts to reach mass market potential.
Right.
So using that sort of basic rule of thumb, the strategy I had was to start off with a high-priced, low-volume car, being the sports car. And there's only a few types of cars that people are willing to pay a high price for. Sports cars being one of them, really premium sedans being another. But the easiest way for us to come to market with a long-range car was with a sort of smaller sports car. And then phase two, which we're seeing now, is the Model S, and that's mid-price, mid-volume. And then phase three is the high-volume, low-price car. or lower price.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you raised $260 million from your IPO,
Yeah.
about $325 million or so in private capital, and almost $500 million in federal loans to get your cars to market. Correct?
Yeah. I'd have to check on the number for the private capital. I'm not sure it's 300.
Oh, okay.
I think it's less than that.
Okay.
But
several. Well,
a couple hundred million.
A couple
Let's say
$100 million
it's
here or there. Okay.
Call it a couple $100 million in private capital.
You raised the money.
A couple $100 million in IPO, and then
half of the 460
almost
million
$500 million in government loans.
In government loans.
Although it's important to point out, we've actually only exercised $50 million of the government loans.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
only a small portion of it,
money.
and that only started this year in February.
Okay.
One of the common misperceptions out there is that we got bailed out by the government last year, because
that's very common, isn't it?
everybody's getting bailed out. But actually, the first government cash we received was only earlier this year in February.
Okay.
And we did make an announcement last year that we'd received a conditional commitment from the Department of Energy, but it was not. We didn't actually receive any cash. So if we'd needed cash or if we needed cash last year from the government, we'd be dead.
So but you have sort of a credit line from the government, as sounds
yeah,
like
we're essentially a credit line.
Okay. Do you think you'll draw on that, and do you think that you will need? Okay, so you will draw on that, but you have sufficient funds, and just what's the probability that you will not have to raise additional money before you get the Model S out in 2012?
Well, I think we have really, it's very unlikely that we will need to raise additional money for the Model S program. I feel very confident being able to complete the Model S program for something very close to what we have budgeted, which is on the order of $500 million in total.
Okay.
Now, it's possible that we could decide that in order to fund developments beyond the Model S, that we want to sell some additional equity or something like that.
Right.
Or, it could be that some of our investors want some additional liquidity or something like that. But I feel very confident in saying that we will not need to raise additional capital for the Model S program.
Let's talk about the Model S. You have them. The base price is $49,900. It goes about 160 miles. And then it goes all the way up to 100,000, as you said, and maybe 300 miles or so. But in the next year, actually in the next 6 months, you're going to have a number of hybrid cars, the GM car Volt, Chevrolet Volt, and
Volt,
the Nissan.
yeah, right.
Different markets, yes. I mean, 33,000, 41,000, but the car, your Model S is $49,000. That's sort of similar markets. I mean, if you...
I wouldn't say they're similar markets.
Really?
Yeah.
Well then, okay. Because you could, wouldn't you want to get somebody in the market for a $41,000 car to upgrade and buy a $49,000 car?
Well, I think the best way to think of the Model S is that it's comparable to, say, a BMW 5 or 7 Series or an Audi A6, A8.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's a premium sedan.
Okay.
And I think anyone who can afford the Model S is not going to be buying the Volt or the Leaf or anything else. It's really, this will be the car that they would prefer. So I think affordability is the only thing that's going to stop people from buying the Model S.
Okay. So Tesla benefited from the zero-emission vehicle program.
Yeah.
You made about $8 million in that. So to what extent did that factor into the decision to make pure play electric cars versus hybrid cars?
It didn't factor into it at all.
Really, $8 million isn't a lot of money.
No, it's obviously it's desirable. I think it's a good thing, but it wasn't something that drove our decision. I mean, we really wanted to make zero-emission vehicles, and the ZEV credit thing was helpful in us succeeding in doing that. I mean, we could succeed, I think, without the ZEV credits, but the ZEV credits definitely helped.
You wouldn't have done it if you would have done it if the credits weren't there.
Correct. But nonetheless, we're still grateful for the credits, and they're certainly helpful.
I'm sure.
But I mean, the car would be profitable even without the ZEV credits.
Is the company profitable today? When is it going to be profitable?
Well, if Tesla if all Tesla did was make sports cars, if we were just a niche sports car maker and sold powertrains to other car companies, we would be profitable today. So running right now around 20 to 22% gross margin. So any company that's running sort of on the order of 20% gross margin can be profitable if their business, as long as they don't try to grow their business too fast. But in our case, we are growing our business very fast. We're talking about increasing our production volume from roughly 500 cars a year to 20,000 cars a year. That's a factor of 40 increase in 3 years.
So in 3 years, do you think, are you going to be profitable? Are you telling Wall Street you're not going to be profitable for the next 3 years? Or?
Correct. We have. And it's not really possible to be profitable. Because essentially what we're saying is we're going to take $500 million in R&D and tooling and that kind of thing and spend that over the next, say, roughly 10 quarters. So that's an average of R&D and tooling expense of $50 million a quarter.
Let's talk about your strategy, your distribution strategy. That's something that you're innovating there as well. You hired the head of a veteran at the Apple and Gap stores. That says a lot about your strategy, as opposed to hiring someone that's a veteran in dealerships.
Sure.
What's your strategy there?
Well, I think for a lot of people, the car buying experience is quite negative. They don't look forward to buying a car. And I think we want to try to have a fundamentally superior consumer experience from the moment you think about buying a car to the actual acquisition, the ownership, the service. We're really trying to achieve something that is substantially superior to what people have experienced in the past. So we don't want to. That's why we don't sort of inherit, what was done in the past, because it's not good. I mean, I think if you were to ask most people, what's the worst retail experience you've had? I mean, for a lot of people, that's buying a car. So not something you want to emulate.
No, that's a
on the other side of the spectrum,
innovation.
you have sort of, I think Apple is arguably the best on the retail front, where people are really drawn to an Apple store. Gap is also excellent in that regard. And so that's, better to emulate their approach than to try to copy the old way of doing business.
So at Vader, we have many entrepreneurs watching this program, and they're always interested in how someone fundraises. And you raised money for a car, and you've never had any experience building a car. You had the passion. So was it difficult to raise the money for Tesla, or is it because you already put $100 million into SpaceX and had enough money? Did that make it easier to bring new investors into your venture?
Well, I think I had the advantage initially of having the capital from PayPal, and so I was able to do all of the initial funding myself.
For Tesla?
Or almost all, I shouldn't say all, but like 90% of it. And then there were some other investors. There were some minor venture investors in the beginning.
So not very.
But essentially, I did almost all the initial investment myself. And with that initial investment, the first thing we did was to try to get a working prototype.
How much was that did you put in for the working prototype, an initial investment?
I think it took us, I did most of the Series A and Series B. I think I put in probably about 15 million or something like that.